everybody. This is our fourth Pints and Politics in 5 days. Can you hear me? I don't know if I need a microphone. So raise your glass if you are a Pints and Politics veteran. If you have been to more than one of these. No, first time. Raise your glass if you're a first time Pints and Politics. Mic on? I'll turn it on in a second. My name's Autumn Phillips. I'm the managing editor of the Post and Courier. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We had this idea that people might want to drink beer and talk politics, and I'm going to turn on the microphone. Thank you, Marianne, for being here.
Thank you.
This is Caitlin Bird, our political reporter, and Skylar Croft, our political editor.
All right.
Thank you guys for coming out. Sorry, we're still learning how to do the mics and the sounds. We're print people, so thank you for bearing with us. As you can see, the woman to my right is Marianne Williamson. We're very thankful she's here. Marianne is an author, a spiritual leader, and now a 2020 Democratic presidential candidate. To date, she has written more than a dozen self-help and spirituality books, and Mother Jones once called her the high priestess of pop religion. In 1983, she moved to Los Angeles and spent years teaching a massive 3-volume book called A Course in Miracles. And over the next decade, she would garner a massive following, particularly among LGBTQ men during the HIV and AIDS crisis, for whom she held weekly support groups when few other organizations would. She also founded a charity called Project Angel Food to deliver meals directly to HIV/AIDS patients' homes. Though she may be best known as Oprah Winfrey's spiritual advisor, she has dabbled in politics before. In 2004, she ran for Congress in California. That was unsuccessful, but obviously she's still got an interest. And among her presidential policy plans, she has proposed a $100 billion in reparations for slavery, $500 billion. With $10 billion, is that number still correct? $10 billion to be distributed annually over a decade?
No, because it would be over 20 years.
Over 20 years. This is why we have these conversations. But born in Houston, Texas, we hopefully got that right. In 1952, Williamson is the youngest of 3. Her father, Sam, was a World War II veteran and an immigration lawyer. Her mother was a homemaker. Williamson's most famous quote is, "Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." And we welcome her here today.
I'll start with the first question here. So, you've never held public office before. You've never been a mayor. You've never been on city council. Never with a planning department. Never on the library board. What really qualifications you have been taken seriously as someone who's running for president?
Well, I'd like to begin by talking about the qualifications as determined by our founders, those who wrote the U.S. Constitution. They said that the qualifications for the presidency are that you were born here, that you had lived here for 14 years, and that you were 35 years old or older. Now, if they had wanted to say you had to have been a governor, you had to have been a senator, had to have been a congressman, they would have. But they didn't for a reason. Often in the Constitution, it's as significant what they didn't say as what they did say. And they didn't say you have to have been any of the things I just mentioned because they were leaving it to every generation to determine for itself the skill set that that generation feels is most necessary to navigate the times in which we live. Now, we have a situation where very experienced politicians led us into Iraq, very experienced politicians led us into Vietnam, very experienced politicians led us to where we are. So there is this illusion about qualifications. I respect political expertise, I absolutely do, and I respect qualifications. But I have a set of qualifications that I feel are, in a way, even more relevant to the times in which we live. We are not lacking political mechanics today. We are lacking political vision. We are not lacking political expertise as a political establishment defines it. We are lacking moral certitude. I have been in rooms with men in pinstripe suits talking about airstrikes. They were very experienced and they had all the kind of political expertise that supposedly you need. They're lack of any deference whatsoever to the fact that they would be bombing the homes of innocent men and women and children who had done nothing to us, I find morally horrifying. We have a lot of good political experts, and I think the Democratic Party right now really has a lot of good political experts. We need someone who doesn't just know how to be the mechanic for the car, but knows what road we should be on. I understand you don't have the qualifications, they say, to drive their car. You know what I say? Baby, we need a new car.
Let's talk a little bit about the last time you ran for office, and bear with us as we work on the sound. That's okay. We're learning together. That's okay.
I'm doing it, I'm sorry.
I don't know, it might be all of us, but it's fine. When you did run for Congress, you ran as an independent.
Yes.
What makes you want to run as a Democrat now, and then what makes you different from other Democrats?
Well, I have been a Democrat all my life. I felt that running as an independent was a principled thing to do. And I do think it was a principled thing to do because the Constitution does not mention political parties. And George Washington warned us against them when he left office. He said that they could form factions of men who would be more concerned with their faction than with their country. So I felt running as an independent was a principled thing to do and ended up realizing it was a very naive thing to do. But also, particularly right now, not only is it the extraordinary power of the two parties, and unfortunately over the last few decades, who actually make it very difficult for someone who is not, given the fact that Donald Trump is president, I would not do anything to lure 10 votes away from the Democratic nominee in 2020. This is not the year to play with that. I would rather see a realignment of the Democratic Party with the principles that I associated with it during my childhood and my growing up. But at this point, we have become our filter of left versus right, Democratic versus Republican, liberal versus conservative. We need an American politics. We need an American politics. It's not even about are you left or you right. I believe at this point it's are you fresh or are you stale? And so at this point, yes, I'm running as a Democrat. I feel very strongly about the principles of the Democratic Party. I'm definitely on the left. I am a progressive left-wing Democrat. And I understand why President Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. There are high-minded conservative values, and there are high-minded liberal values. Neither one of them are the problem today. The problem is a corporatist agenda. It is amoral. It is neither conservative nor liberal. It posits that short-term profits for huge multinational entities should come before your safety and health and well-being, the safety and health and well-being of your children, the safety and health and well-being of the people of the world, and the safety and the health and the well-being of this planet. For us to get stuck with this oppositional left-right is to distract ourselves from the real opposition to American democracy today.
We recently had an outbreak of mumps at College of Charleston here. The college requires its students to have 3 vaccines before enrolling, including measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. In the past, you described mandatory vaccines as draconian and Orwellian. Where do you stand on vaccinations, and what are your thoughts on the anti-vax movement?
Well, first of all, a lot of the people who are called anti-vax, I don't believe are anti-vax. Vaccinations save lives. Look at smallpox, look at polio. Many of the people that I have talked to who have been referred to as anti-vax are simply asking why so many bundled together? Why so many at the same time? Why so many? I don't think that so, and then that word is used to make anyone who wants to have any kind of a nuanced conversation turn into some crazy person. I understand the danger. We all do. And of course, anytime there is a medical intervention of any kind, there is benefit as well as risk. I understand that the government has to come down on the side of public health. I also believe that coming down on the side of public health should have to do in every single situation with independent research that has nothing to do with any testing paid for by big pharmaceutical companies.
We're sitting in a coastal district, a beautifully coastal district surrounded by ocean. And the topic of drilling for oil has come up a lot here, especially in the first congressional district race. And after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, you suggested via Twitter to visualize the oil spill plugged. Close your eyes for 5 minutes and see angels coming over it, filling it with sane and sacred thoughts. It begs the question, can you be pragmatic and spiritual when addressing issues like this? Question is, can you be pragmatic and spiritual when addressing issues like the Deepwater Horizon oil spill?
Spirituality is the path of the heart. What's wrong in America is that our public policy is heartless. That's the problem with our public policy today. When you have mass incarceration is heartless. Racial disparity in criminal sentencing is heartless. Our environmental policies in which we desecrate the planet with no thought of the safety and the well-being of our children's children is heartless. Too much of our foreign policy, which is based on expanding corporate profits for defense contractors or American corporations, even at the expense of the moral values that we've always associated with this country, is heartless. Spirituality is the path of the heart. You're asking me if you can have spirituality and practical politics? What I'm saying is if we do not close the gap between public policy and the knowledge of the heart, then we risk a very, very dangerous path. In fact, we're already on a very dangerous path that imperils our democracy and could even imperil our planet.
Faith is important to you, as it is to many in South Carolina.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Faith is important to you. Faith. Faith.
Faith is very important to me, yes.
As it is to many in South Carolina. You're Jewish, and you said you might have become a rabbi if you'd had better schooling. You sum up your religious views this way: my religion is Judaism, my spirituality is universal. How would you describe the role of religion in politics today, and how should that change?
The separation of church and state is one of the most important and enlightened aspects of the U.S. Constitution. Let's be very clear about what it is. It has a dual function. On one hand, it means that there is no priest, minister, mufti, rabbi, ayatollah, anything like that, that's going to come into the halls of Congress, rip up a law, say that they cannot pass that law, or they have to pass another. That's the kind of thing you see in a country like Iran, for instance, where the Ayatollah can come in. That's not going to happen. The functioning of our government is protected from interference by religious dogma or doctrine. Now, it also has another function which is equally significant. There is no church, mosque, synagogue, yoga class, AA meeting, Course in Miracles meeting, or Young Atheist meeting, which is equally important, because freedom of religion is not only the freedom to worship as you wish, but if you wish, which is also extremely important. The fact no policeman's going to come in here today, whether it's about politics, and say break it up, and no policeman's going to come in to a church or a synagogue and say break it up. But look at what that means. Our founders were seeking to protect the religious and spiritual conversation in America. They weren't seeking to suppress the religious and spiritual conversation in America. The fact that you're a person of faith doesn't mean you give up your First Amendment rights. Doesn't mean you give up your voice as an American. Where do you think we got abolition? We got abolition from the early evangelicals and Quakers. Many of the leaders of the women's suffragette movement were Quakers, and the civil rights movement came from a Baptist preacher named Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Anytime this country has been morally off the rails, anytime this country has been swerving away from the deeper democratic and humanitarian principles on which we purport to stand, anytime this country has been swerving away from, that little thing about how God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it has often been the most spiritual voices among us who have stood up and said, that stops right now.
This is our first audience question. Do you favor Medicare for all? If so, how will you pay for it?
I believe that we should go with the public option in addition to the Obamacare exchange. I have many progressive friends who disagree with me about this, but I believe that that is the best way to do this. I believe that we should repeal the 2017 tax cut. It was a $2 trillion tax cut that gives 83 cents of every dollar to the very richest individuals and corporations. I believe we should put back in the middle class tax cut. I believe we should cut the corporate subsidies. Martin Luther King again, he said, if they give it to rich people, they call it a subsidy. If they give it to poor people, they call it a handout. Last year alone, we gave $26 billion to oil and gas. They're already making those, we gave them subsidies. I love the little bit of applauding over there. We gave $26 billion in corporate subsidies. The corporate subsidies should stop. Next, the United States government has surrendered to big pharmaceutical companies its right to negotiate for lower drug prices. We should take that back. Next, we should say to the U.S. military, how much you need, guys? And every dollar that they say they need, they should get. And the hundreds of billions on top of that they didn't say they need, but simply that defense contractors say they want in order to increase their own short-term profit, that goes away. Then we should say to those who have made $1 billion in this country, if you made it righteously, we're so happy for you, and we would like 3% on the $1 billion of assets, please. Then we say to people who have made $50 million, we're also happy for you, because the problem in America is not that some people can get rich here. That's a good thing. The problem is that not enough people can get rich in America today. So we say to those with $50 million or more, guess what? We're happy for you too, but we would like 2% on that. Now, once we do those things, you know what's going to happen? We're going to have some cash on hand. And then we're going to do what we should do. First of all, we're going to make sure no more 13 million American children going to sleep hungry at night. And we're going to make sure that we make a transition that is absolutely necessary for the long-term survivability of the human race on this planet, from a dirty economy to a clean economy, but we are going to do so in a way that is so tenderly respectful of everyone's need to have a just transition so that their jobs are transitioned but not lost. We are going to make sure that America pays its historical debts and that we simply take this next step with reparations for slavery, which is only going to be an economic stimulus, and with reparative measures for Native Americans. And we are going to say that we're not just going to have a national security agenda that is based on endless preparation for war, but we are also going to wage and declare peace. See, this is the thing, ladies and gentlemen. If you really want money, because you say, how do you pay for it? First of all, can we stop pretending we're not the richest country in the world? And what we really need to do is stop the massive transfer of wealth that we've had over the last 40 years, by which we have created a situation putting so much money in the hands of 1% that 1% of Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 90%. If you really want a prosperous economy 10 years from now, I'll tell you what you do. Take better care of your 10-year-olds today. Everything we do to actualize the potential of the brain of an American child, that's where money comes from. Money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. So every time when you pay universal health care, when you get rid of these ridiculous college loans, when you make education free, higher education free for everyone, what you're doing is stimulating your economy. No more looking to a bunch of corporate aristocrats to drop job creation from their table like a bunch of crumbs, when after 40 years we know that that does not work anyway except to serve them. We start anew with an economics aligned with the dictate we really should try to love one another.
We're going to transition now. We're going to stick with policy because it's fascinating. But we're going to do it in our own way. We call it the 90-second question.
Okay.
And what it is in 90 seconds, we ask for you to give us your plan for your first 100 days. You
Okay.
will be timed.
Okay.
When it starts to buzz, you got to stop.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, and go.
My plan for my first 90 days?
100 days.
Okay, 100 days. First thing we have to do, I will submit to Congress legislation to establish public funding for federal campaigns. That is because money, the undue influence of money on American politics is the cancer underlying all the other cancers. I will have a referendum. I'd like to put a referendum out to all Americans 30 years old and younger. I want to put a referendum out to Americans between the age of 18 and 30. This will not be legislation. It will be a referendum for you to decide. I'd like to submit to the young people in America the idea we could try for 10 years of everybody between the age of 18 and 26 having a mandatory year of national service. We need you, because we need a World War II level mass mobilization in order to deal with the reversal of climate change. I will meet with black leaders in order to fulfill my promise about starting on a plan of reparations. I will have a new EPA chief who is a world-class environmental scientist. I will put together the coordinative structure for a Department of Children and Youth to rescue those chronically traumatized children. I will have
13 seconds.
okay, and a Department of Peace. I will be creating a Department of Peace.
And you did it. 6 seconds to spare. 6 seconds to spare. You did it.
And then I'm going to call the Israelis and the Palestinians. But that'll be everything.
You spoke longer than your two predecessors on Pints and Politics, so you get bonus points for that.
Yeah. Well, let's keep talking on one of the points that you highlighted in those first 100
Yes.
days, which was talking to African American leaders.
Yes.
One of your biggest moments to date thus far in the campaign was certainly when you mentioned the water crisis in Denmark, South Carolina, on the national debate stage. How are you planning to make inroads with South Carolina voters, especially African Americans, which we know comprise more than 60% of Democratic primary voters here?
I am not someone who's talking one way to black people and another way to white people. I'm not talking one way to Jews and one way to Christians and one way to Muslims. I'm not talking one way to gay people, one way to straight people. I'm not talking one way to rich people and one way to poor people. We need to have a conversation as Americans. Even when I talk about reparations for slavery, I don't see reparations for slavery as a black agenda. I see it as an American agenda. Because whether you're a country or an individual, you can't have the future you want unless and until you're willing to clean up the past. So I don't want to pander. You know, that to me is part of the corruption of American politics today. Politicians figure out what you want to hear. Politicians figure out what you want to hear. I believe political leadership should be someone who is saying what we really need to discuss. And if we do that, it's not going to be something that's always fun today. I find that's the problem I have with the current dominant political conversation. It is too narrow. It is too superficial for the level of conversation that we need to have. I want to talk to the nobility and to the deep intelligence in every American and the conscience in every American. And there's a certain way in which who agrees with me, who doesn't agree with me, that's not my business. My business is to submit to you an option for a politics in which the core principle of all public policy, both domestic and international, is what would help people thrive. Because I believe that's where peace will come from and that's where prosperity comes from. Whether you vote for me, you know, there's something very sacred going on here. You have a lot of candidates to listen to, a lot of really good, smart people. I'm not running against anyone. I'm running with a lot of wonderful people. I'm simply giving you an option, and it's in your hands whether or not you choose.
So far, you've mentioned reparations 6 or 7 times. So let's get into the specifics of that. How would that work? Who would be able? Who would be covered? Would it be by geography? Would it be strictly by race? Is it for slavery before the Civil War, or is it what happened to Black Americans since then?
Yes.
How would this work?
I understand. At the end of the Civil War, it is estimated that there were between 4 and 5 million slaves who were released. Now, Tecumseh Sherman, General Tecumseh Sherman, here, promised all former slave families of 40 acres and a mule. We've all heard that expression, but it's important to take that in. Because if you were an enslaved person, and now you're told you're not, where are you supposed to go? What are you supposed to do? So that 40 acres and a mule would have given people an opportunity to start over. In most of those cases, the money was not given, and then it was rescinded, and I'm sure people here are aware of the history. Once the federal troops left in 1877, many white legislatures, in fact all of them, began to pass the Black Code laws. The Black Code laws were to ensure subpar economic, political, and social opportunities for black people. That was not ended until the Civil Rights Act in 1965. With the first slave ships coming over here in 1619, 250 years of slavery, followed by what was essentially another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people, 350 years. We need to think of political issues not just with our heads, but with our hearts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I'm sure what we need is a season of moral repair. We need to bring our moral values back into public policy. If you have been kicking someone to the ground, and I'm sure we'd all agree that kicking someone to the ground for 350 years is a lot of kicking, you owe them two things morally. Number one, stop kicking. But number two, here, let me help you get back up. That's the part we have never done. Now you ask me, how would we do it? So the economic gap has never been closed, and a lot of Americans are unaware of how much effort there have been at various times at the accumulation of black wealth that have been thwarted by local and state and federal policies. I don't feel, by the way, and I think this is important, I don't think the average American is a racist. I do, though, feel that the average American is undereducated about the history of race in the United States. Now, there is a difference between race-based policies and reparations. Race-based policies, to me, is a continuation of the same paternalism that got us here. I messed with you, now I'm going to tell you how I'm going to fix you. Reparations are different. And by the way, there was a recent study that said if black families created as much wealth as white families in this country, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. Now, reparations say we're going to do this, we're going to have this policy, that policy, who's going to get it? No, I see it very differently. Germany has paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations since World War II. That doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it's gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. Reparations carry an inherent mea culpa, and so they carry spiritual and moral and psychological and emotional force, as well as economic restitution. They are an acknowledgement on the part of one people of a wrong that has been done, a debt that is owed, and the willingness on the part of those people to pay it. My plan is for a Reparations Council. The Reparations Council would be made up, I believe it probably should not be more than 50 people, maybe somewhere between 35 and 50. There would be an array of black leaders from academia, culture, and politics. There is a man, for instance, Sandy Darity, Professor Darity at Duke University, Ta-Nehisi Coates, people who have worked for decades on academic and scholarly research. My plan is for $500 billion that would be dispersed over a period of 20 years. The stipulation on the part of the United States government would be this, that the money is to be used for purposes and projects of economic and educational renewal. That is important. The white American certainly has a lot of money we're handing over. So that stipulation we have absolutely the right to say. But who's specifically it goes to should not be white America's decision. If I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. So the whole point there is it historical black colleges? Is it capital for black businesses? Is it buying whole blocks up in order to deal with gentrification? I don't know. The moral power of all this is that it would be a collection of black leaders in honor of their ancestors and in devotion to their children's children who would be making this decision. And it would end a pattern, an aberrational pattern, and enable our children to start again on higher ground.
Our next question comes from the audience, from one of our Pints and Politics regulars, Mascono, so thank you for coming. His question is, the last president without government experience said he'd hire, quote, the best people. What kind of people will you select for vice president, secretary of state, defense, etc.?
That's just, he said he would hire the best people.
The best people.
I guess he forgot he said that.
Quote.
So my vice president, given the fact that I have not held office such as that before, I think that my vice president should be a U.S. Senator, actually. Someone with vast experience in elective office in Washington. That's what I believe. In terms of my Secretary of State, let's talk about the Secretary of State for a moment. We now have an administration where the first Secretary of State was the ex-CEO of Exxon. We have a current Secretary of State who, when asked, how could we, for the sake of $360 billion in arms sale, support, with aerial support, a genocidal war that Saudi Arabia is now waging against Yemen, in which tens of thousands of people have starved, including children. Our current Secretary of State's response was, sometimes you can have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. Ladies and gentlemen, no you can't. That means you have no value. So my Secretary of State, remember, state is supposed to be diplomacy, development, and mediation. My Secretary of State, first of all, the State Department would have a lot more money. Right now we have the State Department at $40 billion. We have the military, the Defense Department at $760 billion. You can't just take medicine, you have to also cultivate health. We will not just prepare for war, which we must in case war must be, but we will also wage peace. And so my Secretary of State will be someone who is first and foremost, as will everyone in my cabinet, have the consciousness of humanitarian and democratic principle first. I had the honor of meeting the Dalai Lama, and he said to me, the people of the world no longer see the United States as championing democracy around the world. Our Secretary of State, our State Department right now, does more to champion. This is true not only in our international policies, but obviously in our domestic policies. Our policies internationally do more to champion short-term profitability for huge multinational corporations than it does to champion democracy and humanitarian concern. That would end. The head of my EPA would be someone who is a world-class environmental scientist, unless Jay Inslee says he would do the job. So it would be someone who absolutely is ready to help mobilize a U.S. World War II level mass mobilization for the reversal of climate change. And for my Secretary of a Department of Children and Youth, someone who realizes that we have millions of American children who are chronically traumatized, millions of American children who are traumatized before preschool, millions of American children who go to school every day and ask the teacher, is there any food for me? Millions of American children who go to school in classrooms that do not even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. These children should be rescued, no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. I know who would be fabulous at the job. I know who would totally help this country enroll in this vision. I know someone whose professional experience and past experience is perfect for this job. I don't know if we could get her to do it, but it should be Michelle Obama.
You called for stricter control on guns, including eliminating the sale of assault rifles and semi-automatic weapons, universal background checks, and these are all things that many others in the Democratic field are endorsing.
Yes.
But you also said that you endorse almost like a driver's license to own a gun.
Licensing, not registration, but licensing.
Licensing. Licensing is kind of a registry because someone would have to keep account of what you're doing someplace. How in the world is that going to pass? And do you think that with the NRA as strong as it is, that's going to go anywhere?
Until we pass legislation or have a constitutional amendment to get the money out of politics, none of us should kid ourselves. Until we have a Congress and a Senate that is willing to stand up to the NRA, none of us should kid ourselves. A lot of my fellow candidates for this nomination are saying they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Who are we kidding? Obama did everything that it was possible to do within the purview of the fact that he could not get the Congress to go along. That's why my first act is to submit legislation. But ladies and gentlemen, so much is, and everyone else, so much of this right now is in your hands. This is about the people of the United States realizing that none of this will ultimately change until we begin to vote our values in such massive numbers. I also believe in one of the things that even though I do want everything we can possibly do, universal background checks, closing of loopholes, boyfriend loopholes, gun show loopholes, outlawing of bump stocks, outlawing of military-style assault weapons, mandatory buyback licensing. Yes, I want everything we can possibly do for gun safety within the purview of respect for the Second Amendment. At the same time, the American people, we have to ask ourselves, why are we such a violent society? That's why I want a Department of Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, our environmental policies are violent towards the earth. Our criminal justice policies are violent towards people of color. Our educational policies are essentially violent in the sense that we're withholding education from children for no other reason than that their parents don't have high property taxes. Our foreign policies are too often violent in that we head for violence and airstrikes before we head for diplomacy. We must decide whether we want a non-violent society. And that is why both domestically and internationally, with conflict resolution, with restorative justice, with more mental health services for children and families, with social and psychological education skills within the schools, with mindfulness in the schools. We have to go deeper than just treating the symptom. We have to start treating the cause. And that's going to take some changes on the level of policy. It's also going to have to take some changes on the level of our hearts.
We're going to transition to the final stretch of our program. We thank you all for coming out tonight, so thank you for sticking around and being such a great audience. This is honestly my favorite part of the whole program, because we can kind of get to know a little bit more about you.
Okay.
So first let's talk about campaign songs.
Okay.
During your congressional campaign, you had a song called Marianne Can. You did. I watched the YouTube video. Oh yes.
Alanis Morissette had written.
She did today, called Today.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't remember Marianne Kent. Marianne can't remember.
So who would you want to write a campaign song for you now? And what title do you think it should have? Also, if there is one in the works, please tell us.
I don't have an answer for that. Even if I did have an answer for that, I probably wouldn't say because it would be insulting somebody else. And no, there isn't.
No campaign song for now.
No. I mean, I've been playing Higher Ground by Stevie Wonder.
Is that kind of what gets you?
But if I win the presidency, I'll walk out to Respect by Aretha Franklin.
This is one of those questions we just have to ask everyone who comes from South Carolina. What is the best food you have here, and be very specific?
Well, it's grits, but I grew up in Houston, Texas, so we got some competition there on the grits.
Who has better barbecue?
Pardon?
Who has better barbecue?
And now it would be very impolitic for me to tell.
You're also a best-selling author. What two books, one fiction, one nonfiction, have most influenced your life?
One is Rilke's book, Letters to a Young Poet. It's a book I read every couple of years. I pick it up again. It's a book of such wisdom. And other than that, Pride and Prejudice and The Course in Miracles.
Who does a better impression of you in your opinion, Kate McKinnon or Chloe Fineman? These are SNL actresses, if you don't know.
I think they probably know.
I think they know, but I just want to remind them. I love SNL.
Well, I wasn't the actress. It's just that I've never owned a crystal.
I've never talked about crystals. I've never put crystals. So after the first debate, I thought that the memes about me and stuff were very funny. I was on the floor laughing myself. But this latest round, after the second debate, it's not funny. It's strategized political hit. She's anti-science, anti-medicine, crystal lady, woo-woo, lacking in intelligence. There's a reason they're trying to mock me and marginalize me so that you couldn't possibly take me seriously. So given that, yeah, I mean, it's great. Political humor is a great tradition in America, and I appreciate it. But the woo-woo crystal lady is a little funny. I mean, I think Tina Fey would be better.
Oh, really? That's not I can see it. I can see it. And then our last question for the evening is, you've been a regular guest in the past on Oprah Winfrey's TV show, and there was once a lot of buzz surrounding her and whether she would run for president. How did you tell her about your presidential ambitions?
I think you stay Oprah's friend by not talking about her. She deserves that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you all so much for coming out, Marianne. Thank you for being in the hot seat tonight.
Thank you very, very much.
We want to thank the folks at Palmetto for hosting this. We've had 4 of these in 3 days, or 3 days and 4 days. It's just been a rush of these things. We're going to get more of these candidates in, so keep it tuned to Post and Courier, to our newsletter, to our website. We'll get it out next time y'all come back, and bring friends, and we'll go from there. But right now, we're going to close out, and we're going to give the candidate the last 2 minutes to say her piece.
Hatred has become politicized in the United States. It's not like we didn't always have racists and bigots and anti-Semites and homophobes and Islamophobes. We've always had such things. But we thought we had reached a consensus in this country on both left and right, that there were limits past which we would not go on either left or right. We thought we had reached a consensus that neither Republicans nor Democrats would ever be giving such voices as those serious political megaphones. Those levees have fallen. And partly because of social media, partly because there is someone in a very powerful position, no less powerful than the Presidency of the United States, not above harnessing those things for political purposes. This is very, very dangerous. There are way more people who love than who hate in the United States, and there are way more people who love than hate in this world. But the problem is that even though I think the average American is a good person, I'm not saying I think we're better than other people, because I don't think we're better than other people. I think the average American does ask, what is the right thing to do? I think the average American does care about love and mercy and justice and compassion. But what has happened in our country over the last few decades is that too often those questions, what does my conscience say? What would love say? What is the right way to behave towards people, has been limited to the realm of the personal self. We must realize that it's our job as citizens to ask, what is the right thing to do? Not just about our personal behavior, but about economic policies, about tax policies, about educational policies, about foreign policies. That's what it means to say that the power is in our hands. That's what the founders intended. But we must exercise our power by thinking about those things. At a time when hatred has become politicized, we must now politicize love. It is time for the visionaries and the artists and the lovers and the teachers and the scientists. It is time for the humanitarians. It is time for the seekers. It is time for those of us who in our lives put love first. Know that our country must put love first too. Yes. We must become as convicted behind love as some are convicted behind hate. Not because that makes us naive, but because that makes us more sophisticated. People who believe that it's naive to say that our public policies should be built around the core principle that we're on this earth to love each other. They say that's naive. I'll tell you what's naive. What's naive is to think we'll have a good chance of remaining on this planet for another 100 years if we don't at least try. Join me.